You think you're just tired, that you're just not as young as you used to be, that this is what it means to be in your 40s. But what if you're not tired? What if your space, your home, has quietly locked you in a version of yourself you already outgrew? This isn't about age, it's about energy. And Feng Shui can show you exactly where it froze. I didn't always believe that. For the longest time, I thought I was just overwhelmed. Work, bills, kids, laundry, repeat. Life got quiet, but not peaceful, just stalled. And then one day, I caught myself saying something I'd never said out loud before. I feel like I don't move anymore. Even when I do things, I'm not going anywhere. That sentence haunted me. It wasn't depression. It wasn't burnout. It was something deeper. I started looking around my home and realized I hadn't changed a thing in years. Same layout, same energy. Same rituals I used to do, now on autopilot. That's when I started digging. Not into books, but into flow, into Feng Shui, into what my home was silently repeating back to me. And what I found changed everything. If this hits something real in you, if your 40s feel like a loop you didn't mean to sign up for, stay close. Let's walk through 5 Feng Shui mistakes I uncovered in my own space. Tiny rituals I thought were helping me, but were actually keeping me stuck. I used to think clean meant clear, that if I scrubbed the kitchen sink until it shined like a mirror, maybe I'd see something back, some reflection of control, of peace, of a life that still felt like mine. Sunday mornings became my ritual, coffee in one hand, mop in the other. I'd move through the house like I was chasing something. Order, sanity, a little bit of myself maybe. The music was always upbeat, the rooms always ended spotless. But me, I was tired, and not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. There was a moment. I remember it so clearly. I was wiping down the living room shelves, and my hand paused over this photo of my daughter. When she was 6, I hadn't looked at it in months, not really looked. And in that second, something hit me. This room was too clean, not clean like fresh, clean like erased, like someone lived here once, but not anymore. That's when it started to bother me. Not the clutter, there wasn't any, but the stillness. That weird, eerie stillness that feels more like absence than peace. It's a strange thing. How you can keep wiping your surfaces, but never touch the thing that's truly heavy. And maybe that's what I'd been doing all along. Mistaking movement for meaning, mistaking routine for healing, mistaking ritual for flow. But energy doesn't respond to perfection, it responds to presence. And in Feng Shui, cleaning isn't about removing life, it's about inviting it back in. So when did my cleaning stop clearing anything at all? That's when I started looking at it differently. And what I learned about energies changed how I touched every room since. Because here, that's what Feng Shui actually teaches. And no one told me this part. No one tells you this. But a space can be too clean, not tidy, not fresh, but stripped. And when I say stripped, I don't mean minimalist. I mean the kind of clean that removes the pulse, the lived-in magic, the invisible threads between you and your home. That's what I'd done without realizing. Every time I scrubbed the entryway or wiped fingerprints off the fridge, I wasn't just cleaning. I was resetting the energy back to neutral. And neutral doesn't flow, it just sits there, pretty but frozen like a showroom. Like a photo in a catalog, like a life that doesn't move anymore. Feng Shui taught me something I had never considered before. Energy isn't sterile, it's layered, textured, alive, it needs rhythm. A heartbeat, a sense of direction. It needs little pockets of warmth where life can gather. Not just empty corners where nothing dares to settle. I thought wiping everything down was a good thing, but I had wiped away my own energetic footprints. There was nowhere for luck to land, nowhere for money to linger, nowhere for joy to recognize me. I started noticing how certain spaces in my house felt hollow. Not dark, not cluttered, just unanchored. Like the energy had nothing to hold on to. The living room was always spotless, but no one ever stayed in there. The hallway glowed under LED light, but felt colder than the backyard in winter. It wasn't the decor, it was the missing invitation. And energy? It only flows where it feels welcome. It only circulates where it's not being erased every week in the name of keeping things nice. The hardest truth, I hadn't been cleaning to renew energy. I'd been cleaning to control it because deep down, I didn't know what to do with stillness that actually asked me to feel. So I kept polishing the silence instead, hoping it would eventually feel like peace. It didn't. It took Feng Shui to teach me that energy isn't obedient. It doesn't just go where you point, it responds to texture, to presence, to attention. And when a home becomes too perfect to live in, the flow of life finds somewhere else to go. So if you've been wondering why your house feels flat, why your effort feels invisible, why your luck feels like it skips your address, maybe it's not about doing more. Maybe it's about letting your space breathe again. I thought I was making space. Every week, every sweep, every perfectly folded towel. I thought I was clearing room for calm, for clarity, for the version of me that finally had her life together. But I wasn't making space. I was avoiding it, avoiding the messier parts of me that didn't fit in neat drawers or color-coded closets. There's a part of you in your 40s that starts to whisper, "Is this it?" And when you don't have the answer, you vacuum, you rearrange the throw pillows, you deep clean the grout, because if the house feels in control, maybe the rest of your life doesn't have to fall apart today. What I didn't realize until later is that I wasn't cleaning because I loved a tidy home. I was cleaning because I couldn't stand the weight of my own stillness, because the quiet of an untouched Saturday afternoon felt too loud, too honest, too close to questions I didn't want to sit with. So I moved, I dusted, and I freshened up. And I called it productivity, but really, I was just trying to stay ahead of the ache. There's a grief that happens in your 40s that no one warns you about. Not for something you lost, but for the life you thought you'd be living by now. And when you feel that grief quietly breathing behind your shoulder, you polish the surfaces, you light the candle, you scrub the baseboards. Because the house is the one thing that doesn't talk back. That lets you pretend you're okay, even when you're not. Feng Shui opened a crack in that silence. It didn't tell me to stop cleaning. It asked me to notice why I was cleaning, and whether my actions were rooted in fear or in flow, and that question shifted everything. Because once I saw my rituals for what they were, a coping, not clearing, I could finally choose differently, not out of guilt, but out of gentleness. And if you're still holding your breath every time life gets quiet, if you're still trying to scrub your way into feeling whole again, I just want to say, you're not alone in that, and you don't have to keep doing it this way. There's a candle on my side table. Vanilla, bergamot, something soft. It's been sitting there for almost 2 years. The wick is bent. The wax has sunken in on one side. Dust hugs the rim like it belongs there now. I used to light it every Sunday afternoon. After cleaning, after folding towels, after making the house smell like everything was okay. It wasn't just a candle. It was the promise of peace, of control, of maybe this week will feel different. Then I stopped lighting it, not on purpose, just one weekend I didn't, and then another, and another. Now it just sits there, not burned out, just forgotten. A ritual I abandoned the moment it stopped pretending to work. And every time I pass it now, a part of me flinches, because it reminds me of how quietly we give up on ourselves. not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, scented silences. That candle became the metaphor for everything I couldn't name, the dreams I stopped checking on, the flow I stopped calling in, the version of me I stopped believing could still arrive. And the house? It noticed, because energy pays attention to what you forget, and the things you let sit too long without intention. They become portals for stuckness. I used to think that keeping things nice was enough, but now I know. A house that holds old rituals without life starts to hold your energy hostage too. So I picked up the candle last week, not to light it, but to finally thank it and let it go. That one candle said more to me than any self-help book ever did, because sometimes it's the quietest things that hold the loudest truths. A few months ago, I had coffee with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. She used to be a therapist. Now she teaches something called home somatics. I didn't even know that was a thing. We talked about life, work, all the usual mid-40s stuff. And somewhere between the second refill and a joke about joint pain, she said something that cracked me wide open. You know, she said, a lot of women in their 40s start cleaning harder right around the time they start feeling invisible. I laughed. And then I didn't, because I'd never told her how I felt. How that exact word, invisible, had been following me like a shadow I couldn't explain. She leaned in a little and added, "We think we're managing the space, but often we're trying to manage the ache. The house just becomes the place where we perform control, because everything else feels like it's slipping." I went quiet after that, not because I disagreed, but because I knew she was right. That was the science I hadn't read in a book. That was the healing no checklist ever gave me. And when I went home that night, I looked at the way I folded the blankets on the couch, at the way I lined up the dish soap and sponge like I was prepping for an inspection, at the way I erased every sign of the day before bed, as if proof of life was something to be ashamed of. It hit me, I wasn't preserving peace. I was performing safety. And in Feng Shui terms, that's not flow, that's energetic rehearsal. And no life thrives inside a rehearsal space. The house was never asking me to be perfect. It was waiting for me to be present, to stop micromanaging the energy like it owed me stability, and instead just let it move. I didn't stop cleaning, but I stopped cleaning like I was apologizing for existing. Now I take my time. I leave the music on longer. Sometimes I light the candle, even the old one. Not to chase away the stillness, but to sit with it. There's a difference I've learned between wiping something down and wiping something out. I started leaving little things out on purpose. A book halfway read, a sock I'd normally tuck away, a teacup still warm, tiny signs of a life in motion. I even let my daughter leave her art supplies on the kitchen counter for a day or two. Not because I forgot to put them away, but because they looked like color, like presents, like proof. These days I clean with the windows open. Not just to let air in, but to let something out. That quiet hum in my chest, it no longer feels like pressure. It feels like space. The house hasn't changed much, but I have. I no longer scrub because I'm scared. I move because I'm ready, and funny enough, once I stopped chasing stillness through rituals of control, I started noticing the other rituals I'd been doing without even thinking, the ones that seemed innocent, helpful even. But underneath, they were holding my flow hostage, too. Every first Sunday of the month, I lit the sage. That was the ritual. Front door cracked open, clockwise from the living room, smoke gently curling along the hallway, just like the article said. And for a while it felt right, sacred even, but somewhere along the way, it started feeling like brushing my teeth. Mechanical, mindless, done not because I felt something, but because I was afraid not to. I'd walk the circuit, murmur a few words I barely meant, wave the bundle like a wand over spaces that hadn't changed in months. And when I was done, nothing felt clearer, if anything. The room felt heavier, like the smoke had stirred something but refused to lift it. That's when it hit me. I wasn't cleansing, I was covering. In Feng Shui, smoke is movement. It travels where the energy flows or doesn't. It reveals the shape of a space's spirit. It listens, but only if you do. And the truth is, I hadn't been listening, not to the space, not to the ritual, not even to myself. I was just going through the motions. Lighting, walking, waving, done. But energy doesn't respond to ritual alone. It responds to presence, to intention, to the feeling behind the fire. The moment I treated sage like a checkbox, it stopped moving anything. Smoke doesn't lie. It drifts where it's invited, and that Sunday, it hovered in midair like it was waiting for me to show up. I think I was scared of what would happen if I stopped, if I skipped a month. Would the house get heavy again? Would something bad creep in? Would I feel even more invisible? So I kept lighting the sage, not to release energy, but to hold it hostage in routine. Like if I kept doing the ritual, maybe my life wouldn't unravel any further. But deep down, I knew. I was using smoke to avoid silence, pretending I was clearing energy, when really, I was avoiding what was asking to be felt. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. I was in the kitchen, sage bundle in hand, and my daughter walked in, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Why does it always smell like something's burning when you're tired?" I didn't answer, because she was right. That smell, once sacred, had become the scent of my own emotional exhaustion. And every time I lit it, it wasn't to bless the house. It was to drown the air in something I could control. I wasn't burning sage to cleanse the room. I was burning it, so the room couldn't speak back. Later, I read something from a woman who studied energetic repetition. Oh, she said, a ritual done without presence becomes a performance. And performances, no matter how graceful, don't move energy, they lock it. And that stayed with me, because that's what my home had become. Not a space of flow, but a stage of well-rehearsed pretending. I had all the props, sage, candles, crystals, but the main thing was missing, me. I didn't stop using sage, but I started asking myself one question before I did. Am I here? Not in body, but in intention, in breaths, in willingness to feel the shift. Some days I light it, some days I don't, but when I do, I stay still. I let the smoke teach me something. Sometimes it dances, sometimes it sinks, sometimes it just disappears. And I've learned to listen to all three, because real energy doesn't come from what you burn. It comes from who you are while it burns. I always had fresh flowers in the house, always white. White roses, white lilies, sometimes baby's breath in a tall glass vase. Simple, elegant, safe. Every week I'd stop by the grocery store, pick up a new bouquet, and tell myself it was a gift to the house. A ritual of beauty, of care, of light. But one morning I looked at them. I really looked, and instead of peace, I felt paused, like the room was frozen in a kind of polite sadness. There was nothing wrong, but there was also nothing moving. Nothing joyful, nothing alive, just a soft, clean stillness. That no longer felt kind, it felt final. In Feng Shui, white flowers carry the energy of closure, of wrapping up, of goodbye. They're used in rituals of grief, of cleansing, and of letting go, but they are not the flowers of growth. They are not the flowers of luck. They don't call in flow. They honor what has passed. And when I placed them again and again in the center of my home, In my kitchen, in my bedroom, beside the mirror. What I was really doing was repeating a message. We are done here. This is the end of something. Let's keep things quiet and still. But a house that only holds stillness eventually stops holding potential. And I didn't realize how much of my life had started to reflect that. My energy plateaued, my ideas paused. Even money started feeling like it came and went in a whisper. I thought I was decorating with peace, but I was anchoring the energy of quiet resignation. I think I chose white because it never asked anything of me. No boldness, no color to confront, no joy I wasn't sure I deserved yet. It looked calm, and I was tired, so I convinced myself that stillness was what I needed. That neutral meant safe. That clean meant healed. But what I didn't see was how often I was choosing things that wouldn't challenge me to grow. That wouldn't risk mess. That wouldn't invite movement. And in that space of constant white, my own edges started fading too. I became a woman who blended in with her Daker. Quiet, controlled, non-offensive, but also no longer electric, no longer in motion, no longer lit up. One afternoon, my son walked past the dining table, paused and asked, "Why do your flowers always look like a wedding or a funeral?" I laughed, then I blinked because he didn't mean it as a joke. And suddenly I couldn't unsee it. The bouquets had no scent, no color, no story, just arrangement. Just order, they were beautiful and utterly lifeless. That week I bought tulips, orange ones, and the house breathed differently, not louder, but freer, like something had been waiting for a splash of boldness, a heartbeat. Later, I read in a Feng Shui journal that flower color carries frequency. White is reflective. It purifies, yes, but it also closes loops, marks transitions. When used too often, it energetically signals to the space. There is nothing more to open. And that's exactly how my life had started to feel. Like every door was gently closed. And I had forgotten what it was like to want more. It's not that white is bad. But like silence, it only heals when it's followed by music. Now, I still buy flowers, but I ask myself what I want them to say. Sometimes they whisper joy, sometimes they shout luck. Sometimes they just hum a soft reminder that color is allowed here. And so am I place them in corners I once left untouched. Like the windowsill in my office, or the messy little table in the hallway. And every time I pass, I remember the house isn't asking me to be quiet, it's asking me to come alive. If this part of you felt seen, drop a sakura in the comments, not because you always get it right, but because you're starting to choose color again. There's a little gold-rimmed bowl on the shelf by my front door. I placed it there years ago. After reading some Feng Shui tip about money flow and entry points, I filled it with coins, a couple of folded bills, and a jade charm from a trip I barely remember now. It looked beautiful at first, like a quiet promise, like abundance was just waiting to be invited, and for a while, I believed it was working. Or maybe I just needed to believe something was. Then I stopped noticing it. I walked past it every day. Keys in, keys out. Grocery bags, gym shoes. Life doing its usual dance, but the bowl, it stayed the same. And that sameness stopped feeling sacred. It started feeling stuck. One day, I finally picked it up to dust around it and realized I hadn't touched it in almost 2 years. The coins were dull, the bills had curled with age. Even the jade had lost its shine. And something in me sank because I wasn't just looking at a bowl, I was looking at a mirror. In Feng Shui, money bowls aren't decorative, they're directional, they hold intention, they activate flow. But energy only moves through what we're willing to connect with. And what I had created wasn't a money bowl, it was a shrine to old hope. Hope I had forgotten to feed. Energy stagnates where attention dies. And this bowl, once filled with purpose, had become an energetic dead zone, a symbolic void, not attracting wealth, not amplifying luck, just sitting there like a ritual abandoned mid-prayer. That's the thing no one tells you. Symbols don't work because they're pretty. They work because they're alive in your awareness, because you touch them, tend to them, re-enter the contract they represent. And I hadn't done that in a very long time. I think I stopped tending to it when I stopped believing I deserved more. Not out loud, but in the quiet ways, like the way I avoided checking my bank app, or the way I told myself I had enough. Even when I secretly dreamed of more ease. More breath, more room, the bowl stayed still. Because I stayed small, and it hurt to admit that because I thought I was being realistic, responsible, grown, but really, I was just scared to ask again, to want again, to try again. So I let the ritual fade, and with it, my own invitation to abundance. One weekend, my sister visited. She picked up the bowl without asking, smiled and said, "Remember when we made these? You used to believe in this stuff so hard." I froze because she didn't mean anything by it, but her words felt like a diagnosis. I used to believe. I used to light candles and write little affirmations and laugh while placing coins in the bowl like it mattered. And it did. Back then, it did, because I was in it, because I cared, because I remembered why I was doing it. But now it just sat there, quietly recording how much I drifted from myself. I put the bowl back. But this time, I didn't look away. Later that week, I came across a Feng Shui teacher who said something simple but sharp. Symbols that are not renewed become energetic clutter. She talked about ritual fatigue, how we keep items that once held power, but don't realize that power expires when the connection does. She said if your wealth items aren't touched, cleaned, or reactivated regularly, they begin to carry the opposite signal. We've given up here. And that landed, because that's what my house had started to echo back at me. A soft surrender I hadn't meant to make. Now, when I look at the bowl, I don't ask it to bring me wealth. I ask if I'm still present in what it represents. I used to light a candle every night, always after the kitchen was clean, after the kids were in bed, after the emails were answered, after the noise of the day had curled into quiet. That moment, the strike of the match, the low bloom of flame, was mine, and it felt sacred, like I had arrived at something earned, a little sanctuary inside the life I was holding up for everyone else. But after a while, it stopped feeling soft. It started feeling sad, because the more I noticed it, the more I realized I was always waiting until the end of the day to light the one thing that made me feel alive. And even though it flickered, the room still felt dim because the ritual had changed, or maybe I had, and the flame I lit for myself came too late to actually warm me. In Feng Shui, fire is energy, it's movement, desire. Activation, it awakens what's dormant, it calls things in, but it can't move forward. If it only gets called in after everything else has ended, lighting candles only at night, only in exhaustion, only when the world has been fed first, it sends the signal. My light only matters in the leftover hours. And energy listens, it mirrors what you repeat. And I was repeating one message over and over: I'll shine later. The flame was never the problem. It was the timing and the story behind it. Because in my home, candles meant I de-survived the day, but they never meant I was allowed to begin anything. It hit me one night. I was sitting on the couch, candle lit, glass of wine nearby, room dim and quiet, and I realized I was living like I was in waiting. waiting for the house to be silent, for everyone else to settle, for permission to want more, to feel something outside of usefulness. I had built a whole identity around being functional, capable, low maintenance, but somewhere along the way, I mistook invisibility for grace. And the candle I lit every night, it was the most honest part of me. It flickered, it asked for nothing. It stayed even when I didn't. But I only gave it space after I'd erased myself from the rest of the day. One morning, I walked past a window and noticed a half-used candle on the table. Same one I'd lit the night before, but now it sat in daylight. Wick crooked, wax uneven. And something in me whispered, "Why not now?" There was no reason, nothing stopping me, but I didn't light it, because I had trained myself to believe. That beauty was something to be delayed. That softness was something to be earned. That energy only belonged in the hush, not the heat. And that was the ritual I'd been repeating for years, without knowing it had a cost. Later, I heard a speaker say, "Fire rituals done only in isolation often reflect a deeper belief that joy must be hidden." It shook something in me, because that's exactly how I'd been living, privately lit, publicly dimmed. I wasn't afraid of wanting light. I was afraid of letting it take up space. In Feng Shui, when you only activate fire in low energy zones, like nighttime, closed rooms, or after exhaustion, you're not inviting power. You're releasing it in retreat, and no abundance arrives through retreat. The next day, I lit a candle at 10, 3 a.m. sun pouring in, emails unread, kids still asking things, house alive, and I lit it anyway. Not to make a statement, not for aesthetics, not for peace, but because I finally understood that the house wasn't waiting for quiet, it was waiting for presence. Now I light when I feel called, when I'm cooking, when I'm dancing, when I'm writing, when I'm breaking down, because the flame doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks to be included. In the life that's happening right now, maybe you've done all the right rituals, cleaned what needed cleaning, lit what needed lighting, placed the symbols where the book said to place them, but somewhere along the way, you still felt paused, and that pause wasn't failure. It was a message from your space, from your season, from the version of you that's been quietly waiting to live again, not just maintain. So if this episode gave your heart a little room to exhale, thank you for letting it. Thank you for being here, for choosing wisdom of Feng Shui. As part of your own shift, it means more than views, it means you're listening. And so are we. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, your space speaks, wisdom listens.